We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, good to see you all, even though I can't see you.
Right. Maybe you need to come up with a new intro tag instead of nice to see you because, right, you can't see them.
Right, but nice to have them on.
There you go. You could
even
say,
if I can't see them.
you could
How
say,
about that?
you're nice to be here, nice to have you with us,
Yeah,
things like that.
things like that.
I want,
Platitudes like that.
I want to give a quick shout out to some of the people in the chat. That James K. Polk is in the chat, the president.
All right. He's risen.
Our members, Terry Green, Mike DeNicola, Patrick Murray, Barry Smith, Daniel McWilliams, Captain M90's Elemental Bot. A lot of great people here in the chat tonight, Dad. Dr. Ash is here. Dr. Ash has arrived.
All right.
Michael,
Can I tell him about my sore shoulder?
I don't know what kind of doctor he is. Dr. Ash, what kind of doctor are you? We'll see what he says. What's happening this week? Quite a bit. We have Mitch McConnell stepping down from leadership. We have 2 dueling border visits. We have some interesting takeaways from Michigan. But the biggest news of the week is that the Supreme Court will hear Trump's immunity case. Now, you did a short about this yesterday, Dad, and you were pretty fired up. Are you still fired up? Let's hear what you got to say.
I am still fired up. Look, Donald Trump has claimed that he has done nothing wrong in any of these cases, that he's totally innocent. It's all a put-up job by whoever, the swamp, the Biden administration, the deep state, the socialists, you name it. He's totally innocent. And you would think if you were totally innocent, what would you want to do? You'd want to get your case heard as quickly as possible. You want to go before a jury of your peers and prove your innocence. Instead, Donald Trump has done just the opposite. What he has done is following his time-honored practice for many decades that has wormed him out of all kinds of difficult situations, and that is delay, delay, delay. Try to avoid your day in court rather than go to court and exonerate yourself. And central to his delay in the critical January 6th case is this absolutely frivolous claim that a president has absolute immunity for anything he does. This goes back to the notorious Richard Nixon, who after Watergate said, if the president does it, it's not illegal, which was widely condemned across the aisles by every expert. And now Donald Trump is making the absurd claim that he could order Team SEAL 6 to assassinate his political opponents, and the only way he could be held accountable is if he's impeached and convicted. If he gets enough members of his own party to keep him from being convicted, he's home free. It's done. He can't be criminally prosecuted. That goes against the entire American tradition that you are accountable for your actions. And remember, there was a time when the Republican Party primed itself as the party of personal morality and personal responsibility. And Trump has trashed all that. Leave aside, his assaulting women, his bragging about assaulting women, his multiple affairs. He takes responsibility for nothing. It's never anything he's done. It's always someone else. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has weighed in and has become complicit in Donald Trump's delay tactics. Way back in December, Special Counsel Jack Smith said to the Supreme Court, take up the immunity claim that Donald Trump is making. Let's get this resolved once and for all. So either the trial will be canceled because you'll give him immunity or you don't, and we can proceed with the trial. 2/3 of the American people, 2/3, want the trial to take place before the election so they can have the information on whether or not Donald Trump is convicted for trying to undermine our democracy. You can't get 2/3 of the American people agreeing on how to spell their own name. And here they are agreeing that they want this trial to take place. Well, Supreme Court doesn't take it up in December. The case goes to the DC Circuit, a panel of 2 Biden appointees and 1 appointee by Republican President H.W. Bush. And in the strongest possible terms, in a scathing, lengthy, detailed opinion, they utterly reject this claim that Donald Trump has immunity for committing crimes while he is president. Well, Supreme Court then waits 2.5 weeks and then says, oh, we are going to take this case. But we're not going to take it very quickly. We're not going to have oral arguments for about 7 weeks until the end of April. And then who knows when they may deliver an opinion. It could be as late as the end of June, kind of indefinitely postponing the trial. Remember, you don't remember this, Sam. I don't think, you're too young, but in 2000, there was this big dispute over who won Florida, and it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court acted in 4 days on a much more complex matter than this frivolous claim of presidential immunity. And in 4 days, in a split decision, 5-4, they stopped the recount in Florida with W. Bush ahead by 538 votes, which gave him all of Florida's 25 electoral votes and the presidency by 1 electoral vote. 4 days. Now they're taking months to decide a much, much simpler case. But there is some silver lining here. Number one, Trump is going to trial in a state case in New York, which of course the media has totally misrepresented. They're calling it the hush money case. It is not a hush money case. Donald Trump is not on trial for paying hush money to silence the porn star who claimed an affair with him. That's not what the case is all about. It's like most of his other cases. It's an electoral fraud case. Donald Trump is being charged with defrauding the American people in an election by not just by paying this porn star off, but by concealing it from the American people and misrepresenting it as though it were a business expense. And it's an open and shut case. We know he paid the hush money, and we know he misrepresented it as a business expense because we have the checks signed by Donald Trump himself. And his fixer went to jail, Michael Cohen, for this very thing.
Back to the SCOTUS case for a second. Why do you think they're taking so long to take this up? Don't you think they would want to get it over with? You know, they're getting so much scrutiny. There's so much on the line here. Why are they delaying this so much?
Well, the cynical explanation is they're helping Donald Trump.
But that's too cynical, right? That's too
delaying tactics. 3 of the judges were appointed by justices, were appointed by Trump, and 2 others, Alito and Thomas, are basically partisan hacks. So it's quite possible 5 justices are complicit with Trump in delaying this trial. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is they consider this a very serious matter. I don't know why, but they could consider it that, and that it requires extensive due deliberation rather than putting it on the rocket docket. That is another plausible explanation. And they may want to take it up too, because Trump is apparently trying to raise this in the Florida national security case involving his stealing national security documents, claiming that he packed them up while he was president, so he's immune. I mean, that's an even more absurd claim, but maybe the Supreme Court wants to clear out that claim as well. That's the more optimistic view of the court. We'll never know because the court is accountable to nobody.
Do you think there's a chance that they're actually going to go through this and say Trump is immune, which then just means presidents are essentially immune from crimes while they're in office?
I find that almost impossible to believe. No matter how partisan these judges might be, that would be such an extraordinary blow to American democracy. Hey, if they rule that way, then Biden is immune. He can declare martial law and call off the election. And there's nothing you could do about it unless you impeach him. And if the Democrats don't agree to impeach him, he's immune. Nothing you can do. So I just can't imagine that they're going to say a president is above the law and is immune from crime. What I think they might do, and this is a hallmark of the Roberts Court, is decide the case on some small technicality. They kind of phrase their consideration in a strange way. Is a president immune from alleged official actions? I don't know what it means, alleged official actions. Either they're official actions or they're not. So I'm a little confused by the phrasing of the issue by the court, which suggests to me that they are sailing towards certainly not giving presidents immunity, but maybe deciding the case on a more limited basis.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary outlook. I mean, it feels like, especially in this country, the president is gaining more and more power, especially on sort of just a existential level. But it's a scary outlook, right?
It's very scary. And I'm going to put this in the biggest possible context. Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed. For most of world history, democracies barely existed. The first golden age of democracy was after World War I, when there were, out of very few, there were 24 democracies. By the early 1940s, that was more than cut in half, down to about 11 democracies. And in the 21st century, at our own time, democracy is in retreat all over the world, including in the United States. Democracy is not typically destroyed by foreign invaders. It is typically destroyed from within. And Donald Trump, is blatant about this. The thing about Trump is he commits his crimes right out in public. He said, yeah, I'll be a dictator on day one. Well, if you're a dictator on day one, you're a dictator forever. No dictator in the world has ever said, I'm a dictator on day one, but I'm just going to give it up and no longer be a dictator.
I have done
very,
that.
very frightening.
I have done that in computer games and video games before. I've played Civilization or Rise of Empires on the computer, and I just play for a couple hours, and I play as Alexander the Great or some dictator, but then I'm done.
Right.
Right. Anyways.
So you should be the next president, but
right.
You're too young.
Let's talk about Michigan for a second. Did we see with people intentionally not voting for Democrat okay, let me start that over. Did we see with people intentionally not voting for Biden under the Democratic ticket, did we see a vulnerability there in the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza and Israel? Is this something that the Biden administration should start worrying about? And how will this all affect the 2024 election?
Yeah, forget about Michigan. I mean, yes, that is a warning shot over the bow. But even before that, you've heard me say the war in Gaza has rendered two critical keys on my system very shaky: the foreign policy success key and the foreign policy failure key. And things have gotten worse in Gaza after this massacre of people apparently simply online to get food, posing no threat to the Israeli Defense Forces. Biden is in an impossible spot. He is not the head of Israel. The head of Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the darling of the American right wing, not of Joe Biden and the Democrats. It was the right wing that pumped up Netanyahu, who was a Israeli Donald Trump, the worst possible person that you could have in charge of Israel at this critical moment, the worst possible person. And Biden has very limited leverage He has a very, very narrow, very difficult path to trod. He can't totally abandon Israel. But on the other hand, he can't, condone what Israel is doing in Gaza. But how does he stop it? This is a huge challenge for Biden.
What should he do? I mean, it seems like from a political perspective, he needs to start at least seriously pursuing a ceasefire, no?
I agree with that. The most important thing, of course, in the short run would be at least a temporary ceasefire and release of the hostages. But this massacre that just took place, unfortunately, makes what looked like somewhat promising negotiations that much more difficult. I agree. At this point, he's got to push for a ceasefire. But that has political perils too. The Jewish vote is very solidly Democratic. It's a much, much bigger vote than the Muslim vote. So, if you want to secure the Muslim vote, you're risking losing a percentage of the Jewish vote. It's a political no-win for Biden, unless he could somehow thread the needle here. And Netanyahu doesn't listen to him. Netanyahu doesn't care what Biden says. The only way Netanyahu might listen to Biden if Biden says, if you don't do what I tell you, we're going to cut off all aid to Israel. But that is politically disastrous too.
But isn't there an argument that the Jewish vote is mostly concentrated in big blue states like New York, California, Maryland, Massachusetts, and that Michigan may decide the election, and with their huge Arab and Muslim population,
it's not that big. It's not big enough to swing the election. There's plenty of Jewish votes in the swing states as well, more than there are Muslim votes. Look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. There's substantial Jewish populations in all of those states, even though, much heavier Jewish populations in New York and California. And again, you don't want to alienate either bloc. It's you don't want to make this into a zero-sum game. But Biden has a very, very difficult path to trod.
I think another issue that I've noticed amongst my peers is a lot of my peers are now calling for people not to vote, actively calling people not to vote for Biden.
Disaster. I've seen that movie before. I was young once, believe it or not, and it wasn't back in the Middle Ages. It was first election I voted in, 1968. Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson's vice president against Richard Nixon. And a lot of my young friends, my peers, didn't vote because they thought Humphrey was too closely tied to the Vietnam War, even though he was much more anti-war than Nixon. They sat home. Nixon wins by the most narrow of majorities and comes within an inch of destroying our democracy, lets the Vietnam War rage throughout his first and truncated second term, engages in the genocidal bombing of Cambodia, the bloody assassination of the Democrat in Argentina. American history took a very negative turn as a result of these people saying, oh, gee, Humphrey isn't good enough, we're not going to vote for him. It's a binary choice. There's no such thing as a protest vote in a general election. There are two choices, Biden or Trump. And if you don't vote for Biden, you're going to elect Donald Trump, and God forbid the consequences.
I hear that. I mean, there's no doubt that even on this specific issue, Trump would probably be 10 times, if not 20 times worse than Biden, especially.
This is why he wanted to ban all Muslims from the United States. He'd be a disaster.
Right. But
he'd be cheering on whatever Netanyahu did.
Right. But what I've heard from a lot of young people is that they're tired of this idea of, I have to choose what's given to me, this binary A or B choice, and they want to take down the system and whatever that means.
You don't take down the system by not voting. You want to take down the system, you organize, you get involved. Not voting is the worst possible choice that you can make. And while you may think, gee, I'd rather have, I'm not sure who they'd prefer to Joe Biden, frankly. Who would they rather have? That is the choice. That's the way it is. And you can cry, you can scream, and all your tears will not wash away the reality of what a presidential election represents.
Any comments you want to make about our final two topics, either McConnell stepping down from leadership or Biden and Trump at the border this week?
Yeah. We should not be sentimental, as some have, about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell has been a disaster as majority leader. He stole a seat on the Supreme Court, not even giving Merrick Garland a hearing, much less letting the Senate vote on the Garland nomination. That was one of the greatest travesties in American history. And of course, right from the start, Mitch McConnell said, I'm going to block anything that comes out of the Democrats. So I can't think of anything good, that is represented by 17 years of Mitch McConnell's leadership. He only looks a little bit better, I guess, because, I guess he doesn't believe in shattering our democracy the way Donald Trump does. And as far as both going to the border, it's quite clear Donald Trump doesn't want to solve the border. He wants to keep the chaos going because he wants to use it politically. An amazing thing happened a few weeks ago. You got bipartisan agreement on a major immigration reform bill. We haven't had one in decades, and Donald Trump torpedoed it without even seeing it. He didn't even know it was in the bill. He just said, we're going to vote this down simply because he didn't want to do anything about the border. For 2 years, Donald Trump had a Republican Senate and a Republican House. How many border bills did he pass, Sam?
I don't know.
Come on, think about
Zero.
it. Zero. So this notion, just elect Trump and he'll solve the border, is the sheerest nonsense.
Okay, let's get to the chat. Let's get to the questions. Remember, if you want your questions to have priority, become a member today, or you can donate if you want. Remember, the stream and our channel is free to interact with, but we do love the members and we do love the donations. And speaking of that, Don Ollie with a new membership. Thank you, Don Ollie, for becoming a member. Our first question is from Tim.
Wait, let me just say, we need the membership and the donations.
I just said that.
If you want to keep this thing going, we need some support.
Yeah, he's a busy man, guys.
He's
a busy man. It's hard to get him,
exactly.
here every week.
I just got back from delivering the keynote address at Oxford Union, the keynote address at the Larkin Seminar in the American Presidency, and in Hong Kong, the keynote address at the Asian Financial Conference. I'm about to go to Brazil and deliver the keynote address at the Latin American Financial Conference.
Pretty impressive. Tim, with a $5 donation, they ask, has any incumbent president lost re-election when the economy was this good and no Americans were dying in wars overseas?
Probably not. If you look at the presidents who've lost, H.W. Bush, the economy was not this good. Americans were not dying overseas. Jimmy Carter, a terrible economy. Herbert Hoover, a terrible economy. So the answer, at least in modern American history, last 100 years, is no.
Terry Green asks about the uncommitted primary vote. So we just talked about that. Canadian citizen number 273 asks, hello, obviously from Canada. What is the most significant difference in how the media has covered Donald Trump from 2016 to 2024?
It's been pretty consistent. The biggest thing about the media coverage of Trump from 2016 to now is the huge amount of coverage that they give him. Whatever comes out of Donald Trump's mouth gets played on the media. They did a study in 2016. Hillary Clinton far and away outpaced Donald Trump in paid television, but Donald Trump far outpaced Hillary Clinton in free media. And why is this? Because Donald Trump sells. He creates ratings. In that period between, like 222, 223, when Donald Trump wasn't as much in the news, ratings plummeted. Now that Donald Trump is back in the news, ratings have substantially escalated. And, you've heard me say this many times before, the mainstream media has done a terrible job in correctly portraying what's going on with Donald Trump. For example, they've downplayed, as I've said, this state trial in New York as though it was just a hush money trial. It's not important. If it was anyone but Donald Trump, this would be the trial of the century and would be absolutely disqualifying if the candidate got convicted. But somehow they dumb things down when it comes to Donald Trump. It's just awful.
Sour Lemons asks, hey, Allan, I heard that in your interview with MarketWatch, you said Biden has been given the no third party key for not appearing to have any significant third party challenge. Is that true?
No, I said that key is undecided.
There you go. Patrick Gibbs with a $10 donation asking about Israel and Palestine. We have covered that earlier in the show. Theo Meal asks, I live in a Super Tuesday state with open primaries. Should I vote for Biden or Nikki Haley? Which does more damage to Trump's general election chances?
Neither, because it doesn't turn a key. I always tell people, don't consider electability when it comes to your vote. Don't try to be sophisticated and figure out, how your vote could affect things. There's only one sound and solid way to vote. Vote for whoever you believe in.
There you go. 80 Mart asks, does historic illegal immigration not hurt Joe?
Historic illegal immigration. Probably, but unless it turns a key, like the foreign policy, military success or failure key, it doesn't count. And Biden has the right strategy on this, which is, as I said, it was Donald Trump who torpedoed a bipartisan effort to actually do something about the border. It's one thing to scream about it. It's another thing to actually do something. But so far, that hasn't penetrated with the American people. But there's a long way to go on this.
I just want to say, I think we have 260 people watching right now. I think we've hit our all-time high. With
awesome.
Most people watching at once. But we only have 55 likes, so like the stream if you're tuned in right now. Member Chris Walls says, I know there aren't keys for House elections, but I was wondering how you evaluate these races. What do you use beyond the polls to gain insight into who would be more likely to win these elections?
Yeah, let me first of all say I don't follow individual House elections. I have limited time and there are those who follow it very closely. I would commend to you my good friend Charlie Cook, the Cook Political Report, which actually analyzes each individual House race. But I will say this, when it comes to House races and state House races, the Democrats have been shooting way above their polling numbers. The pollsters are always fighting the last war. They think they underestimated Donald Trump when it came to polling. So now they're very worried, that they're going to underestimate Donald Trump again. But what they have underestimated vastly is votes for Democrats. We just had a House election, the special election for the seat in which George Santos was quite rightly booted, a swing district in New York, 2 days before the election. The polls had it as a dead heat. Did it finish in a dead heat, Sam?
No.
No, the Democrat won by 8 points, polling 7 to 8 points above what the polls said. And we saw similar things in the critical Wisconsin Supreme Court election, which was considered tight, and the Democrat won by 11 points. And time and again, when it comes to actual voting, you have kind of a very different situation than you had with Trump. You have the polls underestimating Democratic strength.
Our good friend, the Alex Treefire, asks, is there a deadline in which SCOTUS has to rule on immunity, or can they literally wait years?
They can wait as long as they want, or never rule. There's no check on the Supreme Court. That's the thing. They do whatever they want. Another example is, many independent observers, not just Democratic partisans, have said Clarence Thomas ought to recuse himself from these cases involving Donald Trump because his wife, who he says is his soulmate, his partner, with whom he shares everything, was fist and glove involved in the effort to steal the election for Donald Trump. Plus, he's taken millions of dollars worth of perks and benefits from conservative backers of Donald Trump who have great interest in the Supreme Court. Republicans have raised this hue and cry about Fani Willis, the DA, who might, and I don't think they've shown it, but even if you take their claims at face value, who might have benefited to the tune of a few $1,000s from her former dating partner being a special prosecutor. Clarence Thomas has benefited to the tune of millions of dollars with a clear conflict of interest to these donors who have tremendous concern with Supreme Court decisions, and Republicans haven't batted an eye.
We just got a $50 donation from Joe Cerniglia. Thank you so much, Joe. That's very generous of you. We
once got a $500.
That was crazy. That was insane.
Yeah, and it wasn't from Elon Musk, was it?
Not that I know of. How, in your judgment, does the negatively partisan lens through which Republicans view the economy distort the economy keys to the extent that they will not turn as they should? Good question.
I don't think it's a great question. I don't think that Republican views alone are going to change the keys. If in fact, 80 to 90% of Americans still thought we were in a recession, like was the case in 1992, that might give me pause. But the latest poll shows only a minority of Americans, mostly Republicans, think we're in recession. You got to stick to the keys. Every 4 years, people say to me, got to change the keys. We have a African-American running. We never had that. We have social media. We have extreme polarization. You can't change a system on the fly. That's a recipe for error. Plus, the keys are a very robust system. They go all the way back to 1860 retrospectively, and prospectively all the way back to 1984. So they've held through enormous changes in our politics, our economy, and our demography.
Give me a second. When I went to that $50 donation, the chat doesn't seem to load in its entirety. So give me a second because I don't want to miss other people's questions. Let me see if I can get back to where I was. I don't know why the chat is only loading to a certain extent. All right, here's what we'll do. If you are a member and you wrote a question and I haven't asked it yet, ask it again because I seem to lose.
And anyone can ask
questions. Chat.
Members get priority, but we also answer questions from anyone.
Starling Reese with $30. They say, nice. How does the current balance in the House affect the first key?
It doesn't. The first key is based upon midterm election results. In other words, the results are already in for the first key, the mandate key. And the fact that the Democrats lost seats in the midterm election of 2022, even though it wasn't as big a loss as was expected. The mandate key is simply a mathematical calculation, and that key is already lost.
There's your answer. Sorry, folks. I don't know why the chat's not loading for me. I'm trying to figure out how to get to all the questions that have been asked already.
That's why we need more members and donations to upgrade our technology.
Mike DeNicola asks, hey, Allan, aside from SCOTUS, I was wondering about the impeachment inquiry. Do you think that the Oversight Committee subpoenaing DOJ for 2015 records of Biden's phone calls to Ukraine will find anything?
Absolutely not. You know, their star witness was this guy Smirnov. This was the smoking gun that Jim Jordan and Comer, the head of the Oversight Committee, were touting as proof positive that Biden had been corrupted in Ukraine. Well, it turns out not only had Smirnov absolutely fabricated his charge of bribery, but that he had gotten this from Russian intelligence. And I got to tell you, the Republicans have been deeply implicated in Russian intelligence. Go back to Donald Trump's infamous phone call to President Zelensky of the Ukraine. Everybody's focused on one thing, you know, Donald Trump pressuring Zelensky to open up an investigation of Joe Biden. Bad as that was, there was something worse. Everyone's overlooked. The other thing that Donald Trump asked Zelensky to do was to show that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that intervened in the 2016 election, not on behalf of Donald Trump, but on behalf of Hillary Clinton. Totally fabricated. And where did that come from? It came from Russian intelligence, just like this bogus claim of Biden being bribed came from Russian intelligence. In fact, Biden's actions in Ukraine when he was vice president was to get rid of a corrupt prosecutor who wasn't prosecuting, which was the policy of the United States, the policy of the European Union, and the policy of anti-corruption forces in Ukraine. In other words, Biden was doing the opposite of what Republicans have charged him with doing. This impeachment investigation has just been an enormous embarrassment, but doesn't seem to bother them. Doesn't matter. We made up one thing, that got shut down, we'll make up something else.
Right. Is your 2024 edition of the Keys going to come out before July?
It should, no, I think it's going to come out in July. I just finished it, but you know, it takes a while to actually publish something. Publishing something in just 4 months is lightning speed for a publisher. So I'm pretty confident it's going to come out in July. As I said, I just finished it.
From a judicial perspective, how would America be different if Robert Bork and Miguel Estrada were confirmed to the appellate court and the Supreme Court, respectively?
Well, Robert Bork was on the appellate court, but was not confirmed to the Supreme Court. It was a very rare case of a Supreme Court nominee being shot down by the Senate, by a vote of the Senate. I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference given the largely conservative nominees anyway by Republicans. And there was never any chance Estrada was going to get on the Supreme Court.
Alex Treefire, I see your chat about the one-on-one videos. Send me a DM on Instagram at Sammy Licht and we can talk about that. Jim Blowers says, an article in the paper says the top things are Biden's health, the economy, third parties, immigration, and Trump's trials. Do you agree?
Probably in terms of the headlines and the things that are impacting the media at the moment and the polls. But again, it's noise. You can't predict elections from any of that. You don't know who's going to win or lose based on any compilation of issues. In fact, if you looked at who was ahead in the issues, Hillary Clinton should have won in a landslide in 2016. Walter Mondale, who lost virtually every state to Ronald Reagan, should have won in 1984.
Right, good point, Dad. Miles Wolf asks, will the discharge petition pass Ukraine aid?
It looks like that's the only way. It is astounding to me that Republicans seem to be on Putin's side. Not all of them, but enough of them seem to be on Putin's side in Ukraine. Donald Trump wouldn't even say who he wants to win, Putin or, who's engaged in this aggressive war of choice, genocidal war, or the Ukrainians who are fighting for their lives. We've seen this movie before again. I know, one thing I can provide uniquely is, my historical understanding. After the outbreak of World War II, there was also this very powerful America First majority faction within the Republican Party, led by Mr. Republican, Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, the son of President William Howard Taft, who basically said, we don't care if Hitler wins. America can certainly still thrive and do well, even if Hitler conquers all of Europe. And he voted against Lend-Lease aid to the Allies. If there had been no Lend-Lease, then even the Soviet historians agree Hitler would have conquered the Soviet Union and killed 3 million more Jews that were in the Soviet Union, and may well have conquered all of Europe and killed many, many more Jews. And if you had Hitler in control of Europe, he's not going to stop there. He is going to try to subvert and undermine the United States. So the America First crowd was profoundly wrong in the 1930s and early 1940s. They are equally profoundly wrong today in appeasing the modern day bloody dictator Vladimir Putin.
Member Riley P. wants to know, what do you think would happen to the Republican Party if Trump loses and goes to the big house?
Which big house?
A jail. If he loses the election and goes to jail.
The Great Bar Hotel.
Yeah.
Nothing. I think the Republican Party will continue along, because it's not just Trump. I have a new book coming out called The Truth About Conservatives, Not What You Think. And I show that, in fact, Donald Trump's approach to the world, to the country, is now by far and away the majority approach within the Republican Party, and is quite consistent with the history. Things like Robert Taft, opposing Lend-Lease in 1941. So no matter what happens with Trump, I don't see any big change in the Republican Party. Everyone talks about, the mainstream Republicans. I'd like to know who they are. The mainstream Republicans are now Donald Trump Republicans.
Very true. Do you think a conviction in the Manhattan trial will damage Trump politically, even if it's not as serious as the January 6th case?
Yeah, I've commented on this before. This is a bit like saying you're on trial for rape, but we don't really care about it because you have a later trial for multiple murders. The New York City electoral fraud case is extremely serious, although it doesn't involve violence. It does involve perpetrating a fraud, an electoral fraud, an attempt to illicitly win an election on the part of a candidate. As I said, if it was anyone but Donald Trump, not only would it affect their candidacy, it would end it. It would be the trial of the century. We've never had a trial of any major party presidential candidate or former president for felony or any kind of criminal charges. So I think, the mainstream media needs to get on board here and stop downplaying this trial as though it was trivial and insignificant and doesn't matter. It matters a great deal. And I think at a minimum, it's going to shake things up. How it might shake things up, we really don't know yet.
Dad, we're 4 viewers away from getting 300 people watching the stream right now. That's pretty good, huh?
That's really good, but they got to become members.
Right. And please like the stream because that also helps with the algorithm on YouTube. Beach Boy says that there's lots of protests against Netanyahu in Israel, and they've been going on for months. Would Biden's chances improve if that Israeli government falls, and in what way?
I think the whole world would improve if the Netanyahu government fell. I cannot imagine a worse leader at this critical time in the Middle East than Benjamin Netanyahu. He has single-handedly made Israel a pariah state. He has single-handedly, with support from his right-wing allies, some of whom are even to the right of him, alienated virtually every country in the world. I understand Israel needs to defend itself. I understand the horrors of the Hamas attack and the need for retaliation. But Netanyahu has gone far beyond what was necessary. You don't need to be committing these kinds of atrocities in Gaza.
Dr. Ash asks, what do you think of Ron Paul's policies when he ran in 2008?
Whose policies? Ron Paul?
Yeah.
Not much. He's somewhat of a libertarian, doesn't believe in critical regulations of the economy, doesn't believe in America defending democracy around the world. And I'm not certain of this, but I think despite claiming to be a libertarian, he's also anti-choice. You can't be a libertarian, a true one, and be anti-choice. I'm not certain about that. I apologize if I'm wrong.
HV Bart asks, hi, Professor. If you can you elaborate how Winston Churchill lost the 1945 general election in the UK by using the 13 keys? If not, can you elaborate how you think he lost that election? That's a tough question, man.
Keys here.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, but I will. I was just in Britain. As I said, I gave the keynote in the Oxford Union, and I was asked, can you apply the 13 keys to British politics? And my answer was no. The 13 keys were developed specifically for American politics based on American political system, which is quite different from the British system. We're not a parliamentary system, and American history, which is not coeval with British history. But I did say an expert in British history and politics could apply the keys to British politics, apply the methodology of the keys, develop their own keys. Now, what often happens at the end of a war is that there is a big reaction against the war. And that's what happened in Britain. We also saw that in the United States. At the end of World War I, who was the president during World War I, Sam, and what party was he?
The president during World War I was Woodrow Wilson.
Bingo! The Democrat. And there was a huge reaction against the Democrats. And Warren Harding, hardly a distinguished political figure, won the biggest landslide ever by a challenging party candidate, getting 60% of the vote. Then after World War II, as successful as World War II was, there was a big reaction against Democrats. Fortunately for the Democrats, there wasn't a presidential election. It was a midterm election of 1946, and the Republicans won big, taking back Congress for the first time since the 1920s. So it's the anti-incumbent post-war reaction that, characterizes political systems.
Patrick Murray asks, question, is the West responsible for the war in Ukraine for not dissolving NATO after the USSR collapsed, or was this war inevitable with the rise of Vladimir Putin?
I don't believe in inevitability, but I think it is a grave mistake and excusing a murderous dictator to blame this on NATO. NATO, of course, protected the West from Soviet aggression, but generally, the end of the Soviet Union did not mean the end of challenges to the West, and it would have been incredibly unwise to unravel the collective security arrangements that essentially protected the West for so many decades. Vladimir Putin launched a war of aggression on his own with no provocation, had nothing to do with NATO. It had everything to do with his own desire to recreate the Soviet empire and be the next great leader of Russia. And he has conducted this war in a horrific, genocidal fashion. Ukraine is fighting for its survival and fighting for its life. Putin is fighting to expand his own personal power.
Some Real News asks, have the swing state polls ever differed this much from your 13 keys? Your keys favored a Biden win right now, but Trump is ahead in every swing state by a lot.
That's false. The swing state polls are all over the place. I just saw one today. I think it was either Michigan or Wisconsin where they were in an absolute dead heat. And of course, the swing state polls were wrong in 2016. They were wrong early on in 1980 and in 1988.
While you were talking, we hit over 300 people watching.
Yay! Join.
We've gone back down to 294, but we hit, I think, 302. So that's an awesome achievement for our stream. We started from zero people, 0 subscribers. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but like, we're, working on this channel, pushing it, going from 10 people watching to 50 people watching to hit 300. It feels good.
It does.
Let's see here. Kirk Boo with a $10 donation just says, keep up the good work.
Thank you. We try. And, I'm donating my time on this. And as Sam says, I am incredibly busy, finishing my book, traveling around the world, talking about the keys. But I'm really happy to do this every week and interact with our loyal viewers.
Ross Goldberg asks, why doesn't having a divisive, chaotic primary not hurt the challenging presidential candidate, but does hurt the incumbent candidate? Why do scandals hurt the incumbent, but not the challenger?
That's one of the big insights of the keys. Look, for example, in 2008, you had the big divisive primary between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and Obama went on to win handily. Or 2016, when Trump emerged from a very divisive primary and still went on to win. Or 1960, where you had Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Hewitt Humphrey fighting it out in the primary, and Kennedy still went on to win. It matters for the party in power, because if the party in power is fighting, that questions the governance of the party in power. Correspondingly, a party fight in the challenging party may just indicate that a lot of candidates believe they have a very good chance to win against the incumbent party. That's the distinction between the two.
We hit 300 again. 300 people watching.
Right. Must have been a good answer.
Elemental Bot with a very, it feels related to their name. They say, when do you think the government will start acting on AI? It seems like an issue that could get fairly bipartisan support. AI is getting scary good.
I'm very scared about AI. I'm no expert, I'm an old dinosaur, but I do think that's an urgent priority for the government. Absolutely so. And I haven't seen serious attention to it yet. There are so many extraneous issues that are being brooded about in our politics, and this very serious issue that affects the future of humanity. Same thing with climate change. AI and climate change pose existential threats to our survival as a civilization, and somehow, agitation over the border and, has drowned out these much more important issues. And by the way, this notion that Trump is perpetrating, that migrants and undocumented immigrants are these rapists and murderers and criminals, like so much else, is absolutely false. There have been studies of this. Look at the Cato Institute studies. And undocumented immigrants commit crimes at much lower levels than Native Americans. And the reason is obvious. They don't want to call attention to themselves. They don't want to be deported. So they kind of, try to keep as low a profile as possible. I repeat that. Native-born Americans commit crimes at every level, including murder, at much higher rates than undocumented immigrants.
I just want to say to people, we're going to start wrapping up here, but I will be going live on my channel. I've just put it in the chat and I'll pin it. If you want to come, it's a much more casual conversation, not so politics heavy. But yeah, I will pin it to the chat and there we go. Moving on. So Sour Lemons asked about the pro-Palestinian rallies and if they could turn the social unrest key.
No, there has to be, big enough social protest to really call in question the stability of the country. And these rallies haven't come close.
Zero Calamity claims they gave a super chat, although I don't see it, but I'll ask your question. Dad, is this year the hardest general election to call?
Hard to say. It's certainly one of them, but 2016 might have been the hardest election to call. The other one that was so hard was 1992, when it really took the third party to turn the critical sixth key, and very narrowly the short-term economy key turned. That was a very tough call, and a lot of people thought I was wrong.
Right. Good point. You weren't wrong. You proved them wrong, right, Dad?
Time and again. I go out on a limb every 4 years, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who will be very happy to see me fall off that limb. Not you.
Not me. Thank you,
No,
James
no.
Lagruta, for becoming a member. We appreciate that. Let me see here. Where does the long-term economy key stand at the moment? Also, who do you think would replace Trump if he goes to jail?
Two rather different questions. Long-term economy key is way in Biden's favor. It's not even close. And at this point, I cannot possibly see any way that would change. It would take a very, very deep recession, and it'd have to occur very quickly, and that does not seem to be in the cards, particularly given that it looks like the Republicans are not going to shut down the government, which could have a ripple effect on the economy. I have no idea who the Republicans might replace Donald Trump with. I don't think it'll be Nikki Haley, because I don't think she's consistent with the mainstream of the party, and I find it hard to believe the Republicans would nominate a woman of color. Could be Mike Pence, believe it or not.
You think so? No shot.
No, I really have no clue, but Mike Pence is, kind of a dark horse candidate for that. Look, he was vice president. He's very much in the mainstream of the Republican Party. He's not that controversial, despite not agreeing to unilaterally change the results of the election. I'm not saying it's going to be him. It's not going to be Mitch McConnell, I'll tell you that. It's not going to be Mike Johnson. It's not going to be Jim Jordan.
Right. Mike,
so we've got time for maybe one or two more questions.
Mike DeNicholas says, I read on the New York Times that the Pentagon is considering sending emergency weapons or funding if Congress can't act. Do you think they will truly act?
I do. I think they will do that, but it's limited. I think there's about $4 billion in funding that they could send without any action from Congress. Not nearly enough to make a big difference for Ukraine, but I do think every little bit helps, and I do think they will take executive action and do that. I also think Biden's going to take executive action on the border.
Right.
Since Republicans have made it clear, no matter what a bipartisan group might come up with on the border, they're going to torpedo it.
What was the moment when you used the 13 keys to predict Donald Trump's win in 2016, and how did you personally react?
It was in September, one of my latest, I think my latest ever prediction. I was very nervous. I was pretty much standing alone against all the pundits, the pollsters, even most academic modelers. And as you can imagine, predicting Donald Trump did not make me very popular in 90% plus Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University. And let me tell you something else that, got a lot of attention at the time, but has since been forgotten. The same time that I predicted Donald Trump was going to win, I also predicted that he was going to be impeached. And that prediction was even more derided than my prediction that Donald Trump would win. After all, only 2 American presidents had ever been impeached. You know who they were, Sam?
Johnson and Clinton.
You got it.
Bam.
2 in the entire history of the country. Boy, you're really batting 1,000. President
Belichick asks, other than in the 1864 election, has the incumbent party had a major foreign success this late into a term?
No. That, as I point out in my book, that was really unique, and it really turned around that election. It affected other keys as well.
Sean P. says, what's more effective in your view, a parliamentary system or a presidential system?
I'm a loyal American. I'll stick with the presidential system, but I'm not opposed to a parliamentary system either. But I think a presidential system is more stable. Last question.
All right, last question. President Biden announced he is trying to work with Trump to get the border deal done. Do you think Trump will come to the table?
I think there were 2 chances, slim and none. After all, we had a bipartisan deal, and Trump torpedoed it without even seeing it. He has no interest in a bipartisan solution to the border. He has no interest in solving the border. He simply wants to exploit it for political purposes. That's not, subtle. That's not something I had to, work out. He blatantly, openly torpedoed the bipartisan bill without even seeing it.
All right, there we go. I'm gonna give this guy a rest, folks, because he's been traveling all over the place, giving speeches. So I can see it in his eyes. He's getting tired. He's getting weary. But thank you all for tuning in. The pinned chat that I just put on this channel is the link to my live chat, which I'll do, in 10 minutes or so. After this, I have to switch setups and everything. Any final words you want to give to the people, Dad?
Yes. Don't underestimate the trial that's coming up in a few weeks. It should be the trial of the century, even though the media has not understood it. Follow it closely.
You're talking about the New York trial with the payments to Stormy Daniels.
The falsification of the payments to Stormy Daniels, yes.
Yes.
And by the way, Donald Trump denies that she had an affair with him. Yet he paid her $130,000. Donald Trump doesn't even pay the people who fix the windows of his apartment or who paint, the walls. He stiffs everybody. He's not going to shell out $130,000, this historically stingy individual on a made-up story. I have no doubt that the affair occurred.
I thought you were out of juice, but you bring up Trump and you get those juices flowing again, man. I've never seen anybody like it. Just when he starts talking about Trump, his motor starts revving. This
is true. We've never seen such a threat to our democracy. I'd hate in my old age to see our democracy go the way of Hungary.
Right. Good point. All right. With that, we will end this stream. If you want to keep chatting, I'll be over on my stream. Thank you to everybody for watching. Thank you to our members. Thank you to the donations. It really helps keep this stream going. Have a good night.
Good night.